In a small, peaceful town surrounded by green hills and thick woods, there lived a woman named Eleanor Carter. She was in her late 40s, with soft gray hair tied neatly in a bun and eyes that always seemed to carry a quiet calmness. To most people, Eleanor appeared ordinary. She wasn't loud or flashy. She didn't seek attention or try to impress anyone. Instead, she spent her days doing simple things: tending to her garden, reading books borrowed from the local library, and volunteering at the community center. Her life was predictable, quiet, and content. Eleanor's house was modest but cozy, filled with shelves of well-worn novels, potted plants, and the faint scent of lavender. Every morning, she would water her flowers, sip a cup of tea on her porch, and watch the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Neighbors often described her as nice or helpful, but few took the time to truly know her. They assumed her quiet nature meant she had little to offer beyond polite smiles and kind gestures. At the community center, where Eleanor volunteered twice a week, she was known for her organizational skills. She sorted through piles of donated books, arranging them neatly on shelves so visitors could easily find what they were looking for. Children loved her because she always remembered their favorite stories, while adults appreciated her willingness to lend a hand without expecting anything in return. Still, no one suspected that beneath her unassuming exterior lay a sharp mind capable of solving complex problems and thinking several steps ahead. One sunny afternoon, as Eleanor worked at the community center, a group of men gathered near the chessboard set up in the corner of the room. They laughed loudly, their voices echoing off the walls as they challenged each other to games. Chess was a popular pastime among some of the townsfolk, especially for those who enjoyed showing off their skills. Among them was Thomas, a tall, broad-shouldered carpenter with a reputation for being boastful and arrogant. He loved nothing more than proving he was the best at everything. As the men played, their banter grew louder, drawing the attention of others in the room. Someone joked about how none of the women dared to join their games, which made Thomas grin mischievously. Scanning the room, his eyes landed on Eleanor, who was quietly organizing books nearby. "Hey, Eleanor," he called out, his tone dripping with mockery. "Ever played chess, or is it too complicated for someone like you?" The room fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning toward Eleanor. Some looked embarrassed for her, while others waited curiously to see how she'd respond. Eleanor paused, her hands resting gently on the stack of books she held. She glanced at Thomas, then at the chessboard, and finally back at him. Without saying a word, she placed the books on the table and walked over to the group. Thomas leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself. "What's the matter?" he teased, raising an eyebrow. "Don't tell me you're scared to lose. We could use some entertainment around here." Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a polite smile and said softly, "All right, I'll play." Her response surprised everyone, including herself. Though she hadn't sat down at a chessboard in years, memories of her childhood came flooding back. She remembered long winter evenings spent huddled by the fire with her grandfather, a former regional chess champion. He had taught her the rules of the game, showed her famous matches, and encouraged her to think strategically. Over time, she developed a deep love for the game, though she rarely spoke about it. Now, standing before Thomas and his smug grin, she felt something stir inside her, a quiet determination to prove that appearances can be deceiving. The room buzzed with a mix of surprise and anticipation as Eleanor took her seat across from Thomas at the chessboard. The men who had been laughing moments ago now leaned in, curious to see how this unexpected challenge would unfold. Thomas, still wearing his confident smirk, began setting up the pieces with exaggerated movements, clearly enjoying the attention. He placed each piece with a deliberate clack, as if to emphasize his dominance before the game even started. "You sure about this, Eleanor?" he asked mockingly, glancing up at her with raised eyebrows. "Chess isn't exactly beginner-friendly." His tone carried just enough condescension to make those watching shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some exchanged hesitant looks, unsure whether they should intervene or simply let the scene play out. But Eleanor remained unfazed, her expression calm and composed as she studied the board. "Unsure," she replied softly, her voice steady. She reached out to adjust one of the pawns that Thomas had placed slightly off-center, aligning it perfectly with the squares on the board. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. Her focus was sharp, her attention to detail impeccable. Thomas noticed too, though he brushed it off with a chuckle. "All right then," he said, leaning back in his chair with feigned nonchalance. "Your move first, I guess. Let's see what you've got." He gestured toward the board with a flourish, clearly expecting her to stumble right out of the gate. After all, how could someone like Eleanor, an unassuming woman who spent most of her time gardening and sorting books, possibly hold her own against him? But Eleanor didn't hesitate. She scanned the board briefly, her fingers hovering over the pieces as if weighing her options. Then, with a quiet certainty, she moved her knight forward 2 spaces and 1 to the side. A classic opening known as the Knight's Leap. It was a simple yet strategic move, designed to control the center of the board while keeping her options open. Thomas blinked, momentarily caught off guard. He hadn't expected anything more than a clumsy beginner's attempt, but there was something deliberate about the way she had positioned her piece. Still, he quickly shook off his surprise and responded by pushing a pawn forward, mimicking a basic opening strategy he picked up from casual games. "Not bad," he muttered sarcastically, though his grin faltered for just a second. Around the table, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. A few people tilted their heads, intrigued by the subtle confidence Eleanor exuded. Others exchanged skeptical glances, convinced that Thomas would regain control once the game progressed. No one dared to speak up, however. All eyes were glued to the unfolding match. As the initial moves continued, Eleanor revealed glimpses of her skill without making it obvious. Each decision she made was precise, calculated, and efficient. She didn't rush or second-guess herself, nor did she show any signs of nervousness. Instead, she maintained an air of quiet assurance, as though she were merely solving a puzzle rather than engaging in a high-stakes battle of wits. Thomas, on the other hand, grew increasingly animated. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers impatiently on the edge of the table as he plotted his next move. When Eleanor captured one of his pawns with a swift maneuver, his brows furrowed, and he let out a low grunt of frustration. "Beginner's luck," he muttered under his breath, trying to convince both himself and the onlookers that he was still in charge. Despite his bravado, cracks were beginning to show in Thomas's confidence. For every boastful comment he made, Eleanor countered with another flawless move, slowly tightening her grip on the board. By the time she advanced her bishop into a commanding position, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. What had started as a lighthearted dare was rapidly turning into something far more intense and far more intriguing. Eleanor's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Thomas's growing agitation, creating a palpable tension that kept everyone on edge. Even those who had initially dismissed her as an easy opponent found themselves leaning closer, eager to see what she would do next. Though the game was far from over, one thing was becoming clear. Eleanor Carter was no ordinary player, and Thomas, despite his bravado, might have underestimated her in the worst possible way. As the game progressed, the air in the room grew thicker with tension. The initial amusement that had sparked when Thomas challenged Eleanor was fading fast, replaced by a quiet awe as spectators began to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Each move Eleanor made seemed to carry a weight far beyond the simple push of a chess piece across the board. Her decisions were deliberate, almost surgical, as if she could see 10 steps ahead while everyone else, including Thomas, was stuck staring at the present moment. Thomas, who had started the game with such bravado, was now visibly struggling. His earlier confidence had begun to crack, like ice under too much pressure. Every time he leaned over the board to study his next move, his brow furrowed deeper, and his fingers hovered uncertainly above the pieces. He muttered under his breath, trying to convince himself, and perhaps the onlookers, that he still had the upper hand. But the truth was written all over his face. He was out of his depth. Eleanor, on the other hand, remained the picture of calm. She didn't fidget or second-guess herself. Instead, she sat perfectly straight, her hands resting lightly on the table as she observed the board with an intensity that bordered on hypnotic. When it was her turn, she moved her pieces with precision, placing them exactly where they needed to be without hesitation. It wasn't just skill, it was artistry, and the more she played, the clearer it became that this wasn't her first rodeo. One particularly striking moment came when Eleanor executed a daring maneuver known as a fork. With a single knight positioned strategically in the center of the board, she simultaneously threatened both Thomas's queen and one of his rooks. The room fell silent as everyone realized what had just happened. Even Thomas froze, his mouth slightly open as he stared at the board in disbelief. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, reluctantly, he reached out and moved his queen out of harm's way, sacrificing the rook instead. "Nice try," he mumbled, attempting to sound casual, but his voice betrayed his unease. The crowd murmured approvingly, their respect for Eleanor growing with each passing minute. Some exchanged impressed glances, while others whispered theories about how someone so unassuming could possess such mastery over the game. What made Eleanor's performance even more remarkable was her demeanor. Unlike Thomas, who slammed pieces down when frustrated or sighed loudly after poor moves, Eleanor handled the game with grace. She never gloated or rubbed her opponent's mistakes in his face. In fact, she barely reacted at all, save for the occasional flicker of satisfaction in her eyes when a particularly clever strategy unfolded exactly as she planned. By the time the mid-game approached, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. Thomas, once the cocky instigator, was now fighting desperately to stay afloat. He pushed pawns forward recklessly, hoping to create some kind of counterattack, but Eleanor anticipated every move. She blocked his advances, dismantled his defenses, and steadily tightened her control over the board. It was like watching a spider weave its web, trapping its prey inch by inch. The turning point came when Eleanor sacrificed one of her bishops, a bold and unexpected decision that left the entire room holding their breath. At first glance, it seemed reckless. Why would she give up such a valuable piece? But within moments, the brilliance of her plan became clear. By luring Thomas into capturing the bishop, she opened up a pathway for her remaining pieces to launch a devastating assault on his king. Thomas leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he tried to process what was happening. The confident smirk he had worn at the start of the game was long gone, replaced by a look of sheer bewilderance. Around him, the audience was utterly captivated. They weren't just watching a chess match anymore. They were witnessing a masterclass in strategy, patience, and mental fortitude. And through it all, Eleanor remained unfazed. Her focus never wavered. Her composure never cracked. To her, this wasn't about proving a point or seeking revenge against Thomas's earlier mockery. It was about playing the game she loved with the same passion and dedication she had cultivated since childhood. Yet, in doing so, she was teaching everyone in that room a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Never judge a book by its cover, or a quiet woman by her humble exterior. As the game entered its later stages, the atmosphere in the room became electric. The once loud chatter had died down to a hushed silence, broken only by the occasional clink of a chess piece being moved or the faint creak of chairs as spectators leaned forward in anticipation. Every eye was glued to the board, where Eleanor's pieces dominated the center with precision and purpose. Thomas, who had started the match with such arrogance, now looked like a man trying to hold back a flood with his bare hands. Eleanor's strategy was unfolding beautifully, each move building on the last in a way that seemed almost choreographed. She didn't rush. Instead, she took her time, studying the board as if it were an ancient map holding secrets only she could decipher. Her calmness was unnerving, not just for Thomas, but for everyone watching. It was as though she knew exactly how this would end, and she was simply guiding the game toward its inevitable conclusion. Thomas, on the other hand, was unraveling. His earlier confidence had crumbled into frustration, evident in the way he gripped the edges of the table or drummed his fingers impatiently when it was Eleanor's turn. He tried to mount counterattacks, pushing his pawns forward recklessly in hopes of creating some kind of opening. But every attempt was met with Eleanor's calculated responses, which not only blocked his advances, but also strengthened her own position. At one point, Thomas made a bold move, advancing his queen deep into Eleanor's territory in what appeared to be a desperate gamble. For a moment, there was a flicker of hope in his eyes, as if he believed he might finally catch her off guard. But Eleanor didn't flinch. Instead, she paused, her gaze steady as she examined the board. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she moved her rook, a seemingly innocuous adjustment that turned out to be devastating. In doing so, she trapped his queen between two of her pieces, forcing him to retreat or lose his most valuable player. The room erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Even those who didn't fully understand the intricacies of chess could see that Thomas had walked straight into a trap. His face flushed red as he reluctantly moved his queen back, muttering something under his breath about tricky moves. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained composed, her expression unchanged. To her, this wasn't personal. It was simply the natural progression of the game. What struck the audience most was how effortless Eleanor made everything seem. While Thomas sweated and fidgeted, she exuded quiet confidence. Her movements were fluid, her decisions precise, and her focus unshakable. It was as though she inhabited a different world, one where chaos and doubt couldn't touch her. And the more Thomas struggled, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a matter of skill. It was a battle of mindsets. Eleanor's calm patience versus Thomas's impulsive frustration. By the time Eleanor maneuvered her remaining pieces into a dominant formation, Thomas was visibly shaken. His once boastful demeanor had vanished, replaced by a mix of confusion and dread. He stared at the board, searching desperately for a way out. But every path led to disaster. His friends, who had initially cheered him on, now sat quietly, their expressions a mix of admiration for Eleanor and pity for their humbled companion. One particularly dramatic moment came when Eleanor advanced her knight into a critical square, cutting off Thomas's king from any possible escape route. The move was so elegant and effective that someone in the crowd whispered, "She's got him cornered." Others nodded in agreement, their respect for Eleanor growing with each passing second. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply as he realized the inevitability of his predicament. For the first time since the game began, he glanced up at Eleanor, not with mockery or arrogance, but with genuine curiosity. Who was this woman? How had she managed to dismantle his defenses so completely? Eleanor, however, gave no indication that she noticed his change in attitude. She continued to play with the same quiet determination, placing her final pieces into position with care. Around the table, the tension was palpable. Everyone knew the end was near. They just didn't know how it would come. Would Thomas concede defeat, or would Eleanor deliver the final blow herself? As the pieces closed in around his king, Thomas slumped back in his chair, defeated. The confident carpenter who had mocked Eleanor at the start of the game was gone, replaced by a man humbled by the sheer brilliance of her strategy. And Eleanor, she hadn't said a word throughout the entire match. Yet, her actions spoke louder than any boast ever could. The final stages of the chess match were nothing short of mesmerizing. Eleanor's pieces, now positioned with surgical precision, formed an unbreakable web around Thomas's king. Each move she made was like tightening a noose, leaving him fewer and fewer options to escape. The room, once filled with casual chatter and laughter, had transformed into a theater of quiet intensity. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, some holding their breath, others whispering theories about how Eleanor would deliver the finishing blow. Thomas, who had started the game as the self-proclaimed master, was now visibly rattled. His earlier bravado had evaporated entirely, replaced by a mixture of frustration and disbelief. He stared at the board, his eyes darting between his dwindling forces and Eleanor's steadily advancing army. Every time he reached out to move a piece, it felt like grasping at straws, hopeful but ultimately futile. The confident smirk that had defined him at the start of the match was long gone, leaving behind a furrowed brow and clenched jaw. Eleanor, meanwhile, remained the epitome of calm. Her hands moved gracefully across the board, adjusting her pieces with deliberate care. There was no trace of arrogance in her demeanor, no gloating or unnecessary flair. She played with the same quiet focus she had displayed from the very beginning, treating each move as part of a larger symphony. It wasn't just about winning. It was about executing her strategy flawlessly, step by step, until victory became inevitable. One particularly striking moment came when Eleanor sacrificed one of her rooks, a bold decision that left the crowd gasping. At first glance, it seemed reckless. Why would she willingly give up such a powerful piece? But within seconds, the brilliance of her plan became clear. By luring Thomas's remaining knight into capturing the rook, she opened up a direct line of attack on his king. It was a textbook example of strategic sacrifice, turning what appeared to be a loss into a devastating advantage. Thomas groaned audibly, running a hand through his disheveled hair as he realized the trap he'd walked into. "You're good," he muttered reluctantly, his voice tinged with both admiration and frustration. Around the table, murmurs of approval rippled through the audience. Some nodded knowingly, while others exchanged amazed glances. No one could deny that they were witnessing something extraordinary, a masterclass in patience, foresight, and mental discipline. As the game neared its conclusion, Eleanor's dominance became undeniable. With only a handful of pieces left on either side, she maneuvered her queen and bishop into perfect harmony, creating a deadly duo that left Thomas's king with nowhere to run. The final sequence of moves was breathtaking in its simplicity and effectiveness. First, she advanced her queen to cut off one potential escape route. Then, she slid her bishop diagonally, sealing off another. Finally, with a soft click, she placed her last pawn in position, completing the trap. "Check," Eleanor announced quietly, her voice steady and composed. The room erupted into murmurs of excitement. Everyone knew the end was near. Thomas studied the board frantically, searching for any way to counter her move, but there was none. His king was surrounded, hemmed in by Eleanor's relentless strategy. After several tense moments, he sighed deeply and slumped back in his chair. "All right," he admitted, his tone heavy with defeat. "You win. Checkmate." Before Eleanor could respond, applause broke out across the room. It began as scattered claps, hesitant at first, but quickly grew into thunderous cheers. People stood up, craning their necks to get a better look at the woman who had silenced the boastful carpenter with nothing more than her intellect and poise. Some even whistled in admiration, while others patted her on the shoulder or shook her hand. Eleanor accepted the praise graciously, offering a small smile to those around her. She didn't revel in her victory or gloat about her triumph. Instead, she simply nodded politely, as if to say, "This is how it was meant to be." To her, the game wasn't about proving herself superior. It was about playing with integrity and passion. Yet in doing so, she had earned not just respect, but awe from everyone present. Thomas, though humbled, extended his hand across the table. "I underestimated you," he said, his voice carrying a mix of regret and newfound admiration. "Good game." Eleanor shook his hand firmly, her expression warm but unwavering. "Thank you," she replied softly, her words carrying a quiet dignity that resonated with everyone in the room. In that moment, something shifted, not just for Thomas, but for the entire community. Eleanor Carter was no longer seen as just the quiet woman who tended gardens, and the aftermath of Eleanor's victory rippled through the small town like a stone dropped into still water. By the next morning, word of her triumph had spread far beyond the walls of the community center. Neighbors who hadn't even been present at the chess match were talking about it over coffee and breakfast. "Did you hear? That quiet woman, Eleanor, beat Thomas at his own game," they whispered, their voices tinged with disbelief and admiration. It wasn't just the fact that she had won. It was how she had done it. The calm confidence, the strategic brilliance, the quiet dignity she displayed throughout the match left an indelible impression on everyone who heard the story. At first, Eleanor tried to brush off the attention. She continued her daily routine as if nothing had changed, watering her garden, reading books by the window, volunteering at the community center. But people noticed her differently now. Where once they might have passed her by without a second glance, they now stopped to chat, eager to learn more about the woman behind the unexpected victory. Some asked if she'd always been good at chess. Others wondered aloud why she had never mentioned her talent before. Eleanor simply smiled and shrugged, saying only that it was something she enjoyed in her spare time. Despite her humility, invitations began pouring in. Local chess clubs reached out, asking if she'd be willing to join their weekly meetings or participate in upcoming tournaments. A few parents even approached her, hoping she might teach their children the game. At first, Eleanor hesitated. She didn't see herself as a teacher or a competitor. She played chess for the love of the game, not for recognition or accolades. But eventually, she agreed to attend a regional chess event, curious to see how she would fare against more experienced players. When the day of the tournament arrived, Eleanor entered the bustling hall with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Rows of tables stretched across the room, each one occupied by competitors hunched over chessboards, their faces masks of intense concentration. The atmosphere was electric, filled with the soft clicks of pieces being moved and the occasional murmur of spectators. Eleanor felt a pang of nervousness as she took her seat, but she reminded herself why she was there. Not to prove anything, but to enjoy the challenge. Her first opponent was a seasoned player in his 60s, known for his aggressive style and quick thinking. As the game began, Eleanor fell back on the same principles that had guided her during her match with Thomas: patience, precision, and adaptability. Her opponent threw everything he had at her, launching bold attacks and setting elaborate traps. But Eleanor remained unfazed, countering each move with calm efficiency. By the end of the match, her steady strategy had paid off, earning her a hard-fought victory. As the tournament progressed, Eleanor faced increasingly skilled opponents, each one testing her abilities in new ways. Some matches were close calls, requiring every ounce of her focus to pull through. Others ended decisively, showcasing her ability to read the board and anticipate her opponent's moves. Through it all, she maintained her characteristic composure, earning respect from both competitors and spectators alike. By the final round, Eleanor had become something of a local celebrity. People gathered around her table to watch her play, marveling at the quiet intensity she brought to each match. Even seasoned players, accustomed to high-stakes competitions, couldn't help but admire her unique blend of grace and determination. When the tournament concluded, Eleanor didn't place first, but she didn't need to. Simply holding her own against some of the region's best players was proof enough of her skill. What struck everyone most was how Eleanor carried herself throughout the event. She didn't boast about her wins or dwell on her losses. Instead, she treated every match as a learning opportunity, shaking hands with her opponents afterward and exchanging polite words of encouragement. Her humility stood in stark contrast to the competitive spirit that often dominated such events, reminding everyone that chess wasn't just about winning. It was about connection, growth, and mutual respect. By the time she returned home, Eleanor knew her life had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. She may have entered the tournament as a quiet gardener, but she left as an inspiration, a living reminder that greatness can hide in the most unexpected places. And while she never sought fame or recognition, she embraced the role she had unwittingly stepped into: mentor, motivator, and master strategist. In the weeks and months that followed the chess tournament, Eleanor's quiet triumph became a cherished story in the small town. Parents told their children about the humble woman who had outwitted arrogance with intellect, turning what seemed like an ordinary day at the community center into something extraordinary. Teachers used her story as an example of how patience, practice, and humility could lead to greatness. Even local newspapers ran a small article about her, though Eleanor politely declined to be interviewed, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. The community center, where it all began, embraced Eleanor's legacy wholeheartedly. What was once just a corner with a dusty chessboard became a hub of activity, drawing curious beginners and seasoned players alike. Inspired by her performance, the center started hosting weekly chess nights, inviting anyone interested to come and learn. Eleanor, despite her initial reluctance, eventually agreed to help teach the basics to newcomers. She sat patiently at the tables, explaining strategies in simple terms and encouraging even the shyest participants to give it a try. Her teaching style was as calm and thoughtful as her playing. She didn't overwhelm her students with complicated theories or demand perfection right away. Instead, she focused on helping them see the beauty of the game, the way each piece worked together, the importance of thinking ahead, and the joy of solving problems creatively. Chess is like life, she often said with a gentle smile. Sometimes you have to take risks, but other times you need to be patient and wait for the right moment. One of her most devoted students was a young boy named Sam, who had been struggling in school. His parents hoped chess might help him focus better, and under Eleanor's guidance, he blossomed. At first, Sam was easily frustrated when he lost, slamming pieces down or sulking in his chair. But Eleanor never scolded him. Instead, she encouraged him to analyze his mistakes and think about what he could do differently next time. Slowly but surely, Sam's confidence grew, not just in chess, but in himself. By the end of the year, he proudly won his first match, dedicating the victory to Eleanor. As word of Eleanor's mentorship spread, more people sought her out, not just to learn chess, but to seek advice on navigating challenges in their own lives. They admired her ability to stay composed under pressure, her willingness to listen without judgment, and her knack for finding solutions in situations that seemed impossible. Whether it was helping a neighbor plan a garden layout or offering tips on managing stress, Eleanor approached every task with the same care and thoughtfulness she brought to the chessboard. The annual chess tournament held at the community center became a beloved tradition, renamed in her honor, the Eleanor Carter Chess Classic. Players traveled from neighboring towns to compete, eager to test their skills against one another, and perhaps catch a glimpse of the legendary woman herself. Eleanor attended every event, not as a competitor, but as a supporter, cheering on the participants and offering quiet words of encouragement when needed. For Eleanor, these moments weren't about fame or recognition. They were about connection. She found immense satisfaction in seeing others grow and succeed, whether it was a child winning their first game or an adult discovering a new passion. Her presence inspired everyone around her to believe in their potential, no matter how hidden or overlooked it might seem. And yet, Eleanor remained unchanged at her core. She still tended to her garden, read books by lamplight, and volunteered tirelessly at the community center. The only difference was the newfound appreciation people had for her quiet strength and wisdom. To them, she wasn't just a gardener or a librarian. She was a role model, a teacher, and a symbol of resilience. Though she never sought the spotlight, Eleanor understood that her story carried meaning beyond her own life. It reminded people that true brilliance isn't always loud or flashy. It can bloom quietly, unnoticed until the perfect moment arrives. And when that moment came, it left an impact far greater than anyone could have imagined. Years passed, and Eleanor's story became a cherished part of the town's history, a tale told and retold at family dinners, school assemblies, and community gatherings. The woman who had once been seen as quiet and unassuming was now celebrated as a symbol of hidden strength and unexpected brilliance. Her name was spoken with admiration, not because she sought fame, but because she had inspired so many to look beyond appearances and discover the extraordinary within themselves. The annual chess tournament, the Eleanor Carter Chess Classic, continued to grow in popularity. What began as a small local event soon attracted players from across the region, eager to test their skills and honor the woman who had rekindled the town's love for the game. Each year, Participants would gather around the large bulletin board displaying past winners' names, hoping one day to see their own listed alongside Eleanor's legacy. Trophies were awarded, but the real prize was the sense of camaraderie and shared passion that filled the room. Even those who didn't win left with smiles on their faces, knowing they were part of something special. Eleanor herself remained a fixture at the tournaments, though her role evolved over time. In her later years, she stepped back from teaching, leaving behind a generation of students who carried forward her lessons. Many of them went on to mentor others, passing down not just strategies for the game, but also Eleanor's philosophy of patience, humility, and perseverance. Think before you move, she often reminded them. And remember, every loss is an opportunity to learn. Her garden, once a private sanctuary, became a place where neighbors stopped by to chat or share stories. Some came seeking advice, others simply wanted to sit quietly and enjoy the peace it offered. Eleanor welcomed everyone with open arms, offering cups of tea and listening intently to whatever was on their minds. Her home radiated warmth and wisdom, a reflection of the woman herself. As Eleanor grew older, her movements slowed, and she spent more time indoors, reading books and reflecting on her life. Yet her spirit remained as vibrant as ever. She took pride in seeing how far the town and its people had come since that fateful afternoon at the community center. The boy Sam, who had struggled so much in his youth, was now a confident young man pursuing engineering studies at university. Parents thanked Eleanor for helping their children find focus and confidence through chess, and countless others credited her example for inspiring them to pursue their dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. One crisp autumn morning, Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by memories of a life well lived. The entire town mourned her loss, but there was also a deep sense of gratitude for all she had given them. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, friends, neighbors, former students, and even strangers whose lives she had touched indirectly. They spoke of her kindness, her quiet strength, and the way she saw potential in everyone, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. In her honor, the community center erected a plaque near the chessboard where it all began. It read, "Eleanor Carter, a quiet genius who taught us that true strength lies beneath the surface." Beneath the words was a simple illustration of a chessboard, with a knight positioned mid-move, a nod to her favorite opening strategy. To this day, visitors stop by the community center to see the plaque and hear the story of the woman who challenged arrogance with intellect and changed a town forever. Children learned about her in school, inspired by the idea that greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places, and whenever someone sits down at the chessboard, ready to play, they remember Eleanor's quiet determination and the lesson she taught them, that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the simplest among us hold the greatest treasures. Though Eleanor is gone, her legacy endures, not just in trophies or plaques, but in the hearts and minds of those she touched. She proved that true strength isn't measured by noise or bravado, but by the ability to inspire others and leave the world a little brighter than you found it. And in doing so, Eleanor Carter became more than a chess player or a teacher. She became a legend, a reminder that even the quietest voices can echo through generations.